Chapter 7. The following afternoon, Kim and Harry watched Mr. Cleaver and his stockmen leave. Their horses' manes and tails fluttered, streaming out like pennants in the warm wind. As the horses trotted past, Mr. Cleaver waved from his buggy, and Kim waved back. Two of the stockmen lifted their whips, but the balding man remained indifferent. He stared straight ahead, jogging loosely in his saddle. When horses and men were stringing out along the track beyond the homestead, Kim said, "He looks, I don't know, like he's mad about something, but don't know what." He rubbed his head, wondering why it was hard to say exactly what he meant. Harry said, "He's mad all right. A grudge broods in a man, like a chicken in an egg. Some day it'll burst, when he thinks I ain't ready." He pulled his rope from the fence. "My guess is we'll be gone before that. Him and his mates might have to wait for a stock train." Carefully coiling the rope, he glanced appraisingly at the last but one of the colts. It was a dapple gray, silvery and shining in the hot westering sun. "This one's my favorite," Kim thought, climbing up on a rail. "Reminds me of the one Harry brought home. Mum rode it and said it was like silk. Court was great when she was around." For a fleeting moment, he saw a vivid picture of his mother. Then he scuffed his eyes and concentrated on watching Harry. Harry whirled the rope and tossed it over the gray colt's head. Startled at the sudden choking pull on its neck, the colt reared high, lashing out viciously. Then it careered around the yard in a series of wild cavorting bucks. "Look out," Kim shouted. "Look out, Harry. He'll kill you." As he shouted, he lost his balance on the rail and slid headlong. Luckily he missed the colt's flying hooves, but landed heavily on the ground. Rolling over beneath the bottom rail, he sat up gasping. Harry leaped in front of the colt and turned it away, then ran to Kim. Worried, he asked Kim if he was all right. Rubbing his shoulder, Kim said, "Yeah, I'm fine, Harry. Real fine. Just a bump, that's all." Then he smiled and ruefully dusted his shirt. "You wouldn't believe it," he added, "fallen off a fence like that." He looked up at the rail, thinking that it was a good height to fall without really being hurt. A similar thought was in Harry's mind. So was the fear of what the colt's flying hooves might have done, smashing against Kim's falling body. "I'd believe it all right," Harry said, "and other things besides. A breakin' yard ain't safe for no one. A man's mad for being here." Suddenly despondent, he wished they were back to when Kim's mother was alive. There were no ties then, only the freedom of coming and going at will, of getting drunk around town, or riding out to hoe the maize or pumpkins, or riding an outlaw for the sheer hell of it. "Now I'm scared," Harry thought, "both for 'em and me." He stooped and helped Kim to his feet before turning again to the colt. Harry's hands felt hard and reassuring, and Kim sensed the thoughts behind the help. The sudden fit of despondency had made Harry look older. His face seemed tight, grooved with deep lines. He had caught the colt by its neck rope and was soothing it when Kim called, "I reckon you've had enough of me for one day, Harry. I'll go down and look at the garden." Rubbing his shoulder, he ran down the track to the creek. In the lengthening shadows beneath the trees, he sat on the log near the shed. There was a rustling sound from the leaves above, but otherwise a quietness. He peeled some old bark from the log, thoughtful of the tins underneath. I could dig 'em up, he thought, and give 'em to Harry. There'd be no more worries, no more like there was just now. Just me and Harry doing what Mum wanted. We could even paint and paper her room, make it look real good. Overcome by this last thought, he stretched out his legs and looked at his boots. In their dusty leather, he saw chickens in their hundreds, squawking and crowing when he gathered the eggs. Fresh white paint, clean and bright on the veranda, and mounds of pumpkins and maize in the big shed. Corey said, and I might even try some ducklings, little fellers, like puffs of dandelion seed blowin' in the wind. He could feel the soft down in his fingers when he gently closed his hands. He was sorry when he had to stop his dreaming. That night, Harry and Kim were alone in the washroom. They moved about, stripped to the waist, lathering their backs and shoulders with the soldery soap. Pausing to peer in the one cracked mirror, Harry examined his cut. "She's healed," he told Kim, giving the plaster a quick jerk, "so I don't want this on any more." He chuckled as blood ran down his cheek, and he washed it away in a smother of suds. He glanced sideways as Kim whispered, "Phew, Harry, that nearly made me sick. You don't seem to worry whether things hurt." His hands shook, and he cupped them in water before rubbing his face. Harry said, "I'm sorry, real sorry, and you're wrong in sayin' I don't worry, like you was today when you called out about me having enough of you." Pulling a cobweb from behind the mirror, he carefully smoothed it over the cut. As the bleeding stopped, he added, "What I do to meself don't matter. It's what I do for you and your mum that counts." "Yeah, Harry," Kim said. "I know all right. You've done everything. No one could do more." "Not everything," Harry said, "and I could do more. Now dry off quick. Chong'll be after us for being late." They pulled on their shirts and combed their hair. Each was silent, thinking about the other. Kim wondered, as he often did, whether Harry would change, whether some day he would tire of having a boy with him. Harry wondered about Kim being sickened by the sight of blood, or a plaster being stripped from a cut. "I'm me," Harry thought, "and he's him. We ain't all the same, whether young or old. Only his mum could really know him." Walking across to the kitchen, with Kim at his elbow, Harry wondered, for the first time in years, about Kim's father, who he was, and where he was, whether still alive or dead, and why Kim's mother had never mentioned him. "I asked her once," Harry whispered, unconsciously mumbling his thoughts, "but that was all." Her face went white, same way as Kim's. Kim said, "What's that, Harry? I wasn't listenin'." "I was thinkin' about Mum and the dinners she baked." He straightened and squared his shoulders, fighting off his sadness. Harry said, "Nothing, nothing. A bit of a mumble, that's all." Pushing open the kitchen door, he went in, followed by Kim. Old Chung smiled and waved a big wooden spoon. There was a spicy smell of soup steaming on the stove, and Kim and Harry ate with relish. Afterward, Kim helped Chung wash the dishes, while Harry strolled down to the horse yards and tossed the colts a final forkful of hay. The wind was still blowing, and there was a loneliness in it that Harry liked. He felt he wanted to ride on and up into the far mist-shrouded ranges, find somewhere where he could be alone, live as he wanted, with no cares or worries. Then remembrance came of Kim, crouched by his mother's bed, of old Miss Murphy, sniffing as she wiped her nose, and of Dr. Lovell, impatient of the poverty about the weatherboard house. "If I dingoed," Harry said to the listening colts, "and walked out on him, they'd be on him quick, or maybe they'd leave 'em to fight on his own, and he ain't the sort to fight. He's gentle like his mother." The thought brought a fullness in Harry's throat, and he stayed a long time watching the colts feed. In the room he shared with Harry, Kim sat on his bed waiting. He wished Harry would come so they could talk about ducks and chickens, or the pumpkins growing fat on their vines. Finally, when Harry came in, Kim said, "Core Harry, I've got a beaut idea about those old pens." He looked at Harry, waiting for his usual nod, but Harry said, "Not tonight, mate. I don't feel too good. I'm still a bit crook from that crack on the head." He sprawled out on his bed and locked both hands under his head. Kim said, "Okay, Harry, all right," and lay similarly to Harry, staring up at the ceiling. In the morning, Harry rode the last 2 colts he had caught, then prepared his gear for the afternoon. Kim was up on a rail, shading his eyes from the sun, and watching some wallabies cross a distant slope. They were hopping casually, merged into the bluish-gray sheen around them. Lowering his hands, Kim said, "Wouldn't it be great, Harry, to be one of them? You could camp anywhere under a tree. It'd be like a home, having the branches over yer." He chuckled, suddenly seeing himself crouched under a tree with rain pouring down. "It'd be great all right," Harry agreed, "but a tree can be rough. I was under one once when it was split by lightnin'. The hole went up in a sheet of flame and took my tucker with it. I had meat and damper hangin' in a sack on a limb." Uncoiling his long green hide catching rope, he stretched it out on the ground. "A bit of sun," he added, "makes it soft and supple. They throw better when they're pliable." Kim clambered down from his seat and, side by side with Harry, peered between the rails. On the far side of the yard, the big bay colt stood disdainfully, snorting as it tossed its head. There was an air of arrogance about the colt that frightened Kim. He felt it was full of menace. He told Harry this while they were peering through the rails, and Harry laughed. "You're as bad as old Cleaver," he said. "Between you both, I ain't got a chance. Come on now, old Chong'll be waiting." Side by side, the two walked slowly toward the kitchen. After their meal, Kim helped wash the dishes, and Harry split some logs for the stove. The sun was still hot when Kim and Harry strolled down to the yards. "Watch 'em, Harry," Kim said, as Harry coiled the rope. "Watch 'em whatever you do. He's got a terrible look about him." Fidgeting, he kept rubbing his hands nervously on his shirt front. Harry nodded, but said nothing. There was a taut, urgent feeling about his hands and body that showed in his face. He looked calm, yet his hands trembled as he climbed through the rails. But once in the yard, he regained his rock-like confidence. Twirling the rope, he said, "It's me or him, and it's goin' to be him. And to show old Cleaver, although he ain't here, I'm going to ride this feller right now. Ride 'em so it's a fair dinkum, go between and me. No mirthing, no quietening, nothing, just him and me." The colt snorted and began high-stepping around the yard, keeping its gaze fixed on Harry. Harry stared back, twirling the rope. Suddenly it flicked out and settled its wide loop about the colt's neck. For a moment the colt poised, then leaped forward, smashing against the rails above Kim's head. For a hovering, frightening moment, the colt glared down, then dropped back into the yard to strike at Harry. Kim screamed, but Harry quietly sidestepped, slipping the rope's end quickly through the ring on the sandbag. He hauled with all his strength. Reefing backward against the strain, the colt struck time after time. Its flailing hooves seemed to whirl and smash right where Harry stood, but always he sidestepped, missing by the fractions needed. Gradually the straining rope told, and the colt's head came down toward the sandbag. Working swiftly and quietly, Harry tied the rope at the ring, then stepped away, evading a final vicious kick. Peering through the rails, Kim sensed a difference in Harry. His face had hardened until the skin seemed flattened against the bones. There was no hint of the happy-go-lucky about him. As he pulled his saddle from the rails and carried it to the colt, ignoring Kim completely, Harry tied the old chaff bag over the colt's eyes, then girthed the saddle behind its withers. The colt groaned, but otherwise made no movement. Harry's final act was to slip a halter with a lead rope attached over the colt's head. Keeping the lead rope in his hand, he freed the colt from the sandbag and prepared to mount. He was in the saddle and pulling the blindfold from the colt's eyes when he glanced at Kim. Shocked, Harry shouted, "Don't worry, Kim. I'll be right, sure as anything." Kim mumbled, "Yeah, Harry, yeah, I know your will," and drew in his breath as the colt reared high, almost falling backward. Coming down in a spine-jarring jolt, it arced up again in a wild series of bucks that made the yard rails shake. Crouched behind them, Kim stared in silence. There was a numbness in his mind and body. He wished he could shout or scream, do anything to save Harry from the colt's murderous intentions. Jolted wildly, Harry used every nerve and skill he had to stay in the saddle. There was a loneliness about him as he fought the vicious colt. In his mind, too, was the remembrance of Kim's face, strained to a peak no boy should endure. Like it was when his mum died, Harry gasped, forcing the words out desperately. Savagely he spurred and slapped his hand down on the colt, and suddenly the animal reared, flinging itself backward. For a moment Harry hung, clinging to the saddle, and Kim sobbed, covering his eyes. Then there was a sudden, sickening crash, and Kim slowly lowered his hands. Sprawled on the ground, the colt lay, unmoving. Its head was outstretched, locked in the grip of sudden death. Harry stood, equally unmoving, staring down, with the halter rope still in his hand. At last he whispered, "So there it is, a colt lying dead in the sun, and me still on me feet. Why? And there's the question." He turned, and walking slowly toward Kim, stooped and clambered out between the rails. "Yer see," he added, "yer see, Kim, what a man does when he don't think right. I told yer it's me or him, and it's him. But for what? He's dead, and I killed him." Tiredly, Harry leaned against the rails, gazing away over Kim's head to some blurry, hazed point in the distance. Kim said, "You didn't know, Harry. You couldn't, could yer? The way he was bucking. It was all tangled up between you and him. He did it himself, Harry, as sure as anything. Trying to make himself understood clearly, he gestured at the colt." Harry stared for some moments longer, then climbed back through the rails to strip his saddle and halter from the colt. Kim was standing by Harry's side when Mr. Cleaver appeared, driving toward them in his buggy. The old man lurched and swayed as the wheels rolled over the ground, yet his back remained upright. Reining his horses to a halt outside the yards, he asked Harry what had happened, and listened attentively while Harry told him. His manner was cold, aloof almost, while he glanced from Kim and Harry to the colt, lying sprawled on the ground. When Harry finished speaking, Mr. Cleaver said, "Open the gates, and I'll take him down to a gully." From there on, neither man spoke while the colt was taken away, drawn on the back of the buggy by the two strong horses. Kim left worried by the tension between the two men, and sad at the death of the colt. "I dunno," he thought, heading toward the kitchen, "but things go on and on. Ol' Harry was wrong, yet you can't blame him. He was mad, that's all, because he was hurt, or thought he was, and so is Mr. Cleaver. He's hurt because he loves all his horses, yet he shouldn't have said what he did to Harry about the colt being too good for him." The confused thoughts in Kim's mind made him tired, and he was glad to sit down in the kitchen. He had barely settled when old Chung came in from the big house, shaking his head. "By Cly," he said, not looking at Kim, "me sorry too much. Sorry for Colt, sorry for Hallie, sorry for Miss Cleaver, sorry for everyone." Still shaking his head, he disappeared again into the house with a tray of crockery. Sensing that he and Harry would now have to leave in the morning, Kim huddled lower on his chair. There was a sadness where, before, there had been the warmth of food and shelter. "It don't take long," he whispered, as if talking to someone sitting opposite. "1 minute, you're right, and everything's there in front of you. Then it's gone. There ain't nothing except the worry." He sat up quickly as he added, "But that ain't right. Me and Harry have got Mum's house, and that means everything." He was silent then, and the silence remained unbroken even when Harry came in. The two sat on opposite sides of the table, yet neither looked fully at the other. Each ate sparingly, staring at the table. That night Harry sat on the edge of his bed for a long time before he told Kim they would be leaving in the morning. Kim nodded and said, "Yeah, I thought we would be. It wasn't your fault, Harry. The colt got killed." He said the words quickly, glad that Harry had finally spoken. Harry said, "It was, Kim. Don't ever forget it. A man was hired to do the job right, and he didn't do it right. You saw old Cleaver, and it's fair broke his heart. He was proud of that colt, yet I had to go and kill him." Slowly Harry told Kim he had been paid in full for the remaining 6 colts, but had not been paid a bonus. "The thing is," he added, "we'll be 4 or 5 quid short. Makes a difference when we want to pour it into old Maggie's." He took off his hat and hung it on a nail, preparatory to getting into bed. Kim was already stretched, stiff and still under his blankets. Now he said, "You can't do more, can you, Harry? Those 6 you broke were champion." "Yeah," Harry said, and switched off the light. "Champion is right. Now get some sleep. We'll be off bright and early come morning." The bed creaked when he stretched out on it, and he lay for a long time before sleep eased his tiredness. Toward morning, Kim awoke as if he had been called, or someone had shaken his arm. Puzzled, he peered about in the darkness, but heard no sound of movement. He half sat up, then sank back again when he heard Harry snore. It wasn't him, Kim thought, so I must have been dreamin'. Maybe old Chong, or some sort of ghost, was out walking. He grinned, but shivered at the same time, and pulled the blanket up under his chin. Then he felt a sudden surge of excitement. Corey thought, "I could, and nobody'd know. It ain't far down there, and wouldn't take long. I'd be down and back in a jiffy." The thought made him more restless, and he gently pushed away his blanket and sheepskin. Patting on his bare feet, he tiptoed toward the door, urged by some inner prompting that had been in his mind for days. He stole across the veranda. Once on the track outside, he turned in the direction of the creek. As his bare feet pressed against the dry, crumbling earth, he remembered the snakes. Their smooth, squirming movements made the hair on the back of his neck tingle. It felt as if it was crawling up and down. Corey thought, "If I trod on one now, I'd be dead in minutes. Old Harry said those tiger snakes are the worst there is." Shuddering, he wished he could see down as far as his feet, but he couldn't. He could only follow the path by instinct. He reached the creek, and following it along to the little shed, stopped near the log. The feeling that snakes were writhing near his feet grew stronger, and he almost screamed when he trod on a smooth, rounded twig. When it proved to be firm and unmoving, he sat down weakly on the log. "Phew," he whispered. "I'm so bloomin' scared I'm shiverin'. I was mad as anything for sneaking out. Mad, too, to think I could pinch old Chung's money. I couldn't, not now or ever. With the realization came a feeling of tiredness. He wished he was still in bed, warm under the sheepskin and old blanket. It's funny, he continued, in a mumbling whisper, but you don't see right sometimes. You think this and that, and before you know where you are, you're doing it. I was mad, like I said, and like old Harry was when he got on that colt. You could see by his face he didn't know what he was doing. Slowly Kim began to remember back, over the past, to his mother, and the pumpkin patch, and the chickens in their pens. He felt he could almost touch his mother as she brushed past him in the kitchen, and he saw her clearly, flushed face, as she bent over the stove. "Core, Mum," he whispered, "it's great seeing you again. I only came down here because of Harry. He was sad, Mum, about the colt, and losing out on the money. Old Cleaver stopped his bonus." He looked up to where his mother seemed to be, and he thought she smiled. There was a happiness about her, as if she was pleased with what he had done, yet a sadness too about Harry. "He's a good bloke, Mum," Kim added, speaking louder to make sure his mother could hear. She seemed to be fading farther and farther away. "When he talks about yer, he can't quite look at me. He turns his head so I can't see his eyes." Kim leaned forward, trying to hear his mother's answer, but there was only the whisper of rustling leaves. Yet Kim felt a relief as he stood up stiffly and walked back along the path. She don't have to talk, he thought, and she never did. Just a look from her is enough. You can feel what it is she wants. Happy with this thought, he tiptoed into the room and across to his bed. Harry was still asleep, rolled over on his side. A faint gray lifting of the darkness showed that dawn was drawing near. He'll be up and about soon, Kim thought, so I'd better make the most of it. Get another half hour at least. Closing his eyes, he sighed once, then was soon asleep. His small hands twitched, as if he were dreaming of snakes or money. In the early light of dawn, he awoke to find Harry standing above him. There was a warm, sweet smell of tea from the mug in his hand. "Get this into yer," he told Kim, "while I wash and shave. Old Chong's already in the kitchen getting our breakfast." He smiled, and pulling his towel from a chair, went outside again. Kim heard him humming in the washroom while he filled a basin with water. "Core, Harry," Kim shouted, after sipping the tea. "This is great, real great. The first time I've had tea in bed since Mum gave me some. She used to do it on Sundays." Harry was quiet for some time before he finally called, "Yeah, well, today ain't Sunday. Don't be too long over your luxury." Then he added, before beginning to hum again, "Take your time, mate, and enjoy every mouthful. We're going home, and that's the main thing." When Kim went in to wash, Harry was still humming, between blowing the lather from his face as he shaved. Kim joined in the chorus, which was the usual one about a dying stockman. Later, after breakfast, Kim helped old Chung wash the dishes, while Harry chopped a final load of wood. Then Harry held out his hand. "So long, you old yeller peril," he said. "If yer dig up any money, we'll be glad to see you again." He chuckled, and after shaking hands, the two moved toward the door, and Kim followed. His heart had suddenly pounded when Harry mentioned the buried money. Chong said, "By Cly, me wish 'em true, me got 'em money. By Cly, me no belly 'em. Me put 'em in bank, go back to China." Chuckling as loudly as Harry, he paused in the doorway, bowing. His close-cropped head kept bobbing up and down. Puzzled, Kim wondered whether he or the old Chinaman was mad or dreaming. He thought, "I saw 'em there. There was 3 of 'em, sure as anything, and all of 'em full. Now he says they ain't his." Baffled, Kim said, "Goodbye, Chong, and thanks for all you did. Me and Harry'll miss seeing you." He shook the old man's thin yellow hand when it was held out. Chong said, "Hally, old friend, you new friend, old Chong got 2 good friends," and patting Kim on the head, walked back into the kitchen. "So there you are," Harry said, as they went to their room and gathered their belongings. "So much for old Chong and his hidden jam tins. Shows yer how yarns grow in the bush." He rolled the blankets and tied them neatly before swinging them behind his shoulders. Followed by Kim, he left the room. Walking down the track, Kim wanted to tell Harry about the tins he had found under the log, but he couldn't. His tongue felt locked in his mouth. "It ain't like it seems," he thought, "and I don't want to tell 'em, even though I think so. It's a secret I don't want spoilt. That money's there, and if ever old Harry's in need, then I've got it. Perhaps that's why Mum came this mornin', to keep an eye on things." Completely convinced by this thought, Kim felt glad to be following Harry. He felt glad, too, that Mr. Cleaver did not come down to the horse yards to say goodbye. When Rony was harnessed, Kim and Harry clambered over the gear into the gig, slapping the reins down on Rony's rump. Harry said, "Sad what a man leaves behind, but there wasn't no help. We're straws, mate, driftin' in the stream, and have to go where the current pulls. That colt went one way, and we're going another. Some day maybe we'll all meet up." He sighed and sat up stiffly, pressing his shoulders back against the seat. "Do you reckon that, Harry?" Kim asked, and picked up a strap to fidget with in his hands. "That'd be great, real great." He dropped the strap and leaned back beside Harry contentedly. There was a silence then between the two, while the gig covered mile after mile. Chapter 8. In Jinbura, Harry drove to the agent's office and told Kim to hold the reins. "I won't be long," he added, "while I give 'em another tenner. He sometimes hears, too, of a mob that wants breakin'. We got a long way to go to pay for the house." On the long drive from Barwan, he had thought a great deal about many things, mostly of Kim, and the house, and the uncertainty of constantly earning money. His old way of life seemed as if it had never been. As he walked under the veranda into the agent's office. Yet when he came out, he was chuckling. The worry lines had gone from his face as he tipped back his hat. "You wouldn't believe it," he told Kim, climbing into the gig and taking the reins. "But 2 of my old mates were in there, and wanted me to have a drink. Go with them to the pub. He flicked Roni lightly and drove toward the one Ginborough store. Of course I told him no, but it was good just the same. Good blokes fair and square. He began to hum, relaxed by his contact with old cronies. Kim waited until they were outside the store, and the gig had stopped again, before he said, "Why don't yer, Harry? Go to the pub, I mean. I can sit here waitin', or go around to your shack. If we get some meat, I could fry it already." Harry said, "Not on your life, or in 1,000 years. Come on into the store and we'll buy some tucker. Old Roni's right, with the reins tied back." Inside the store, Kim could barely see at first, after the bright sun glare outside. Then he saw that Miss Murphy was at the counter buying some groceries. She glanced up as Harry asked Kim what kind of jam he liked best. Kim barely had time to answer before Miss Murphy said, "Glory be to the saints, God rest 'em all, but 'tis the boy himself and Harry Mueller. 'Tis meself," she added, aside to the storekeeper, who offered to take 'em in and rear 'em as me own. But the devil, the one of it, Harry up and takes 'em, the two of 'em off and out to old Cleaver's to break horses. She sniffed impatiently, as if disgusted at the way affairs had gone. The storekeeper said, "By what I hear, they're doing all right. That'll be 5 and 6 you owe me," and to Harry asked, "What can I do for you, Harry? Don't tell me you're finished already out there at Cleaver's." He put Miss Murphy's money into the till and gave her some change. Like everyone else in Ginborough, the storekeeper knew the movements of all its inhabitants. Harry said, "Yeah, I finished 'em, Joe," and raised his hat to Miss Murphy as she left, after saying, "Well, 'tis meself will be seeing you again, Harry Mueller. You too, Kim." While Harry talked with Joe and ordered groceries, Kim sat waiting on a box. There was a smell in the store that made him feel contented, reminding him of when he was there with his mother, helping select the things they needed. She wasn't like Harry, he thought, but used to poke about, finding out what was cheap. Harry just stands and takes everything without asking what the price is. I guess he don't care the way Mum did. Kim stared down at the floor, scuffing the bare boards with his boot toe. Sometimes a longing came that almost choked him. Harry saw the look in Kim's face and straightened from leaning on the counter. "Come on, Kim," he said. "There's a bit of light stuff you can start taking out. Better than sitting there dreaming." He pushed 2 or 3 parcels together, and Kim took them outside. Once on the street again, his memories faded. Whistling between his teeth, he stowed the parcels under the seat. Inside the store, Joe the storekeeper said, "You were down on him quick. I reckon you know him now one way or another. Took you a while, I'll bet, getting used to him." "Took a while is right," Harry agreed, "but we're coming along. It's when he gets down like he was then that takes the knowin'. His mum was a fine woman." He cleared his throat, wishing he hadn't said the last sentence. Joe said, "She was all that and more. My missus liked her, and so did I. We were always glad when she came in." "Ah, well," Harry said, "it's no good cryin'. The thing is, to do me best for Kim. See your Joe when I'm in town." gathering the remaining goods in his arms. He walked awkwardly toward the door. "Yeah," Joe said, "and mind how yer go, and I don't mean carrying those parcels." He leaned forward over the counter, as if expecting an answer, but Harry made none as he shouldered out through the doorway. After a visit to Stan, the butcher, who told them the chickens were selling well, Harry dumped a package of meat in the gig before he said, "We'll drive up to my shack first and give Roni a spell. He could do with a roll in the dust and a feed." He felt evasive as he glanced along the street. The lure of the little town was strong after the days spent on Barwon. It'd be good, he thought, to have a yarn with those two. A man could tell 'em what really happened. Disappointed, Kim hunched his shoulders. Corey thought, "Fancy wantin' to stay out at Mum's. We could have a beaut time, getting things into shape. I'll bet those pumpkins are full of weeds." Harry climbed up into the gig, and Kim followed. Roni was already trotting when Kim said, "That'll be great, Harry. Ol' Roni deserves a spell and some tucker." Harry made no answer, but instead slapped Roni with the reins. Near the old sawmill, they unharnessed Roni and turned him loose in the ramshackle yards. While he rolled in the dust, rubbing off the sweat, Kim and Harry filled his trough and bucket with water and feed. Then they carried the groceries and meat to the shack. During their absence, more plaster had crumbled away from the walls. It lay in powdery heaps on the bare dirt floor. On the two roughly made beds and the packing case table were leaves, twigs, and droppings left by Charlie and his mates. "That old possum wants his rump slapped," Harry said, scuffing an arm across the packing case, then setting down his load. "Get that twig broom, Kim, and tidy up. I'll cook us a feed while you're at it." Soon there was the warm, rich smell of steak frying and potatoes boiling in the billy. "We'll make tea afterward," Harry said, as Kim swept out the crumbled plaster. "And steady with that broom. We don't want dust in our tucker." The meal was eaten, and both were leaning back contentedly with mugs of tea in their hands, when a battered utility truck braked to a stop outside. Kim watched through the broken doorway as two men came toward the shack. Even before they ducked their heads under the crumbled roofing, he sensed who they were. "They're those two mates of Harry," he thought, "and I'll bet they're after him, want him to go into town or have a drink with them from that bottle." One of the men had a bottle of wine, and he stood it on the packing case. "There you are, Harry," he said, chuckling and winking at Kim. "You wouldn't stay in, so we brought one out. Good of us, ain't it? And I'll lay your 2-to-1 your little cobber here will be glad we did. We brought 'em along some of Joe's best lollies. Toffees, ain't they, Mick?" Mick, the taller of the two men, said they were, and looked around vaguely before he sat down on a bed. Harry said, "You shouldn't have come here, Ted. I told yer I hadn't got the time now or the money. Me and Kim's got a hard road ahead of us if we want to get where we're going." He stared at the bottle, and the warm, sweet taste of wine seemed to cloy in his throat. His hands wanted to reach and feel the smoothness of the bottle. Instead, he drained his tea mug. Ted chuckled again, and after pulling the cork from the bottle, upended it into his mouth. His Adam's apple jerked rhythmically before he set the bottle down again and wiped his lips. "Lovely," he said, "straight from the grapes in South Australia. Now what I reckon is this, Harry. You deserve a break, and a mouthful or two of grog. Not much, but just a drop, in the Royal Mail pub. Your little cobber here can have a roam around until we bring you home." He sat down beside his mate on the bunk, and a smile added to the ruddy cheerfulness of his good-humored face. His mate Mick nodded, and in turn reached for the bottle. When he lowered it, he said, "Yeah, Harry, it'll do your good. Give you a chance to blow the cobwebs out of your mind. You must feel crook after losing that colt. I mean, me and Ted knows yer, so we know how you feel." Listening, Kim felt he wanted to run away, go anywhere, except stay in the shack and be of hindrance to Harry. The men, too, loomed until they seemed to be giants, towering over his own little hunched-up body. Softly he said, "You don't have to worry about me, Harry. I'll be all right here, or having a yarn with Roni. Maybe tomorrow we could go out to Mum's house." He ended wistfully, though he tried to cover this by refilling his mug from the billy on the packing case. Harry felt undecided for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know, but if you don't mind, Kim, I might have an hour or two with 'em. Only that and no more," he added, reaching for the bottle while he looked at Mick and Ted. "With a bit of luck, we can leave early tomorrow. It'll be better, come to think of it." He drank from the bottle until it was empty, and taking a candle he had bought from the store, stuck it in the bottle's neck. "There you are, mate," he told Kim. "I didn't have a tin today for kerosene, so I bought a candle. It'll do for tonight, while we're having our tucker." "It'll do great, Harry," Kim said. "Real great. I'll clean the old lamp, so it's all ready for some Caro tomorrow. Be a job for me while you're away." He looked up and around at the three men about him, then down at the mug still gripped tightly between his hands. There was a warmth in his eyes that told of unshed tears, and he wanted to hide them. "Well then," Ted said, and after he and Mick were on their feet with Harry, he added, "We'll be on our way, and don't forget the lollies. We'll want to see 'em all gone by the time we bring Harry back." Chuckling in the same way he had when entering, he left, followed by Mick and Harry. Before he climbed into the truck, Harry said, "Keep an eye on things, Kim, and remember, you're me real mate. These two are just a couple of fill-ins. Two blokes, you might say, who don't really matter." He half raised his hand in a so long gesture, and Ted and his mate Mick nodded. "So long," they said in chorus, and Mick broke his normal quietness to add, "It's right what he says, the two of us don't matter." Warm inside now from what Harry had said and the friendliness of the two men, Kim watched the truck drive away. Harry leaned out, waving his battered, wide-brimmed hat before the truck disappeared, on its way to Jinbura. Feeling the loneliness that remained, Kim dismantled the old lantern and cleaned it thoroughly. Afterward he washed the mugs and plates he and Harry had used and set them on the packing case. Unrolling the swag, he made both beds and later rummaged through the big old cupboard that stood near one wall. There was nothing in it except yellowing newspapers, so he went outside. For an hour or more he sat on the rails, talking to Roni. It relieved the loneliness, and after a time Kim began thinking about Harry, wondering whether he was laughing and joking now he was with two of his old cronies, or whether he was morose, as he had been on and off since leaving Barwan, and since the colt had killed itself. You can't blame him, Kim thought, going off like he did. He can't talk to me the way he can with them. Besides, he ain't had a drink since Mum went. Look at him when he swallowed from the bottle. He just about died gulping it down. Suddenly sad, Kim clambered down from the rails to wander across to the old sawmill. Its benches and trolleys for carrying the heavy logs and sawing them fascinated him. Up in the dark, cobwebby loft were a number of long leather belts, still on their engine-driven pulleys. The old engine stood rusty and neglected on a concrete slab outside the mill. Standing with his hand on the rusted driving lever, Kim peered up into the darkening loft. The sun was sinking, almost lost to sight beyond the scrub-ridged skyline. A reddish-gold haze was merging with the shadows about the old sawmill building. It's funny, he thought, but you can sort of feel that someone's watching. Maybe the men who used to work here. You can feel 'em about, all big and burly, shouting to hear above the noise of this old engine and the great tearing saws. Immersed in the pictures he was creating, Kim pulled on the lever, but it remained rusted fast. No giant saw blade screamed through a massive log. "So there you are," Kim whispered, and rubbed his hands on his shirt. "It's gone and won't never come back. Harry says they ran out of timber big enough to cut." Reminded of Harry, Kim tried to work out how long he had been gone, but couldn't. It seemed a long time, yet he felt it wasn't fair to think that it had been. "When you're on your own," he muttered, wandering slowly toward the shack, "you get thinking too much and make up what ain't right. Like Mum used to say, you get the willies when you're lonely. She had them often." In the shack, Kim lit the candle and set the knives and forks and tin of salt in the pool of light around the bottle. He thought it looked warm and friendly, and after putting wood in the grate, sprawled out full length on his bed. There was loneliness in the darkening bush outside, and he kept his gaze averted, watching the flickering candle flame instead. It was dancing and bright, blown by the soft breeze filtering through the shack. It's like having a mate, Kim thought, as he closed his eyes, or Mum standing near, while she says something good to yer. "Cor, I dunno. I wish she was back." Gradually, with the warmth of memories and the flickering light, he fell asleep. His last hazy thoughts were of Harry upending the bottle. Once Kim was quiet, stretched, unmoving on his bed, Charlie the Possum came in quietly, peering about with uncertain sight. He crept across to the packing-case table. The candle flame intrigued him, but it was food he was after, and he searched inquiringly, nuzzling the salt tin first, then the battered old tin where Harry had left the bread. Crouched in contentment, Charlie began to eat. His tail twitched, tapping against the bottle. Along the dry, crumbled walls, shadows danced on the tender, dry wattle twigs. Chapter 9. After some hours in Jinbura, Harry leaned back heavily against the bar in the Royal Mail Hotel. He saw the lights had been switched on, but for the moment took no notice. He was aware only of the relaxation flowing through him. His hands felt sure and steady as he twirled a half-filled glass. "This is the life," he told Mick and Ted, leaning against the bar near him. "A man needed a break, and I'm having one. That's what I wanted, a break." The words slurred, and he wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. "Yeah," he added, "a break. That's what a man wanted." Mick and Ted nodded. Slow in thought and gesture, they were men who suited the quietness of Jinbura and its surroundings. Now they were content as they sipped their beer and listened to Harry. He was a man they knew, and a man they liked, a man whom no horse could throw, once he was settled safely in the saddle. At last Mick said, "Tell us about the colt again, Harry. You skipped a bit last time, when Joe, here, jogged your elbow and spilt your beer. You was up to where you'd just tied him down, got him fastened to the sandbag." He braced his hands on the bar and jerked backward, throwing his head from side to side, as if it was tied by a rope, and straining to be free. Ted nodded and said, "Yeah, Harry, tell us." But Ted was intent on listening to other sounds. He thought he had heard the clip-clop of horses coming down the main street. Harry saw Ted's concentration, and he too listened. Mick stopped his pretense at strangulation and stared at them both, wondering why they had suddenly become quiet. Presently Harry said, "It's horses comin' down the street, quite a mob of 'em, I'd reckon." He drained his glass and set it on the counter, pleased now that he had solved the problem of Ted's intensive listening. He ordered another 3 beers. They were slid along the bar by the barman, but remained untouched. The horses came to a stop outside, and after some time had elapsed, 3 men came in, walking stiffly. They were Mr. Cleaver's stockmen, on their way home to Barwon. They intended camping for the night in the stockyards on the outskirts of Jinbura, tired after their long ride back from the railway trucking pens. They crowded in for a drink. The bald-headed stockman was in the lead, and in his haste to reach the bar, brushed past Harry before stopping short. "So help me," he turned to his 2 mates to say, "Now look who's here. The man from Snowy River without his little mate. I guess he got sick of being off the bottle, and came in to drown his sorrows." Chuckling, the bald-headed man ordered 3 drinks, then turned swiftly. Harry clenched his fist, but it was too late. The bald-headed man swung a punch that cut Harry's cheek and sent him headlong into the wall. Reeling, Harry staggered about, dazedly, until the bald-headed man hit him again. Then Harry went berserk. Leaping forward, he hit the bald-headed man square between the eyes, and he went down as if pole-axed. Reaching down, Harry half-dragged the man to his feet, then dropped him again. "You ain't worth it," he whispered. "Neither am I. We ain't neither of us worth a hair of the boy's head. Remember that next time you see us together." Ramming his hat down low on his head, Harry pushed open the door. "I'll walk," he told Ted and Mick, "and clear me head. I need to after the way things have gone. A man shouldn't have left that kid on his own." "No, Harry," Ted said, "but you did. He'll be out on his own some day, so why worry?" He reached for his drink, sorry that the fight had ended so abruptly. Harry was a good man, and fast on his feet, when involved in a real battle. Mick felt the same way. He had seen many a bar fighter, but few in the same category as Harry. "You was too quick, Harry," he muttered. "Far too quick. You should have played with 'em a little bit longer." Then he realized Harry was leaving, and added, "So long, mate. See you around sometime, when you feel like a session." He and Ted were silent, watching Harry leave. Then the bald-headed man groaned as he struggled up from the floor. Walking uncertainly, Harry felt the warm night air fresh in his face. Feeling for the cut, he held it together for some moments before he was able to take his fingers away and walk unimpeded. Reaching the corner near Stan, the butcher's, he saw Miss Murphy talking to two men and a woman. She came across the wide, dusty street in a hurry and peered at him suspiciously. After a deep, audible sniff, she said, loud enough for her companions to hear, "Why, 'tis yourself, Harry Mueller. And where's the boy you would be looking after? Is he well?" Harry said, "Yeah, he's great, Miss Murphy," and impatiently kept on walking. Miss Murphy nodded, and after sniffing again said, "'Tis meself and others of us here who will be glad. We thought a lot of his mother." Seeing that Harry intended turning the corner past the butcher's shop, she added, "Are you on your way to the shack? Is that where the boy is?" She began to fall behind, wanting to hear more, yet unwilling to keep pace with Harry. Harry called back over his shoulder, "Yeah, that's where we are," and felt anger welling up in him as it had in the pub. "I could choke her," he thought, "and the rest of 'em tied together. All that a man wants is to get home and see the boys right. Yet she's sniffin' away like a hound dog after a possum." Aloud he added, "Good night, Miss Murphy. I'll tell Kim you were askin' after him." Miss Murphy called, "Aye, 'tis in a hurry you are. Look after the boy, Harry Mueller, or 'tis your conscience itself that will want a reckonin'." She sniffed for a final time before returning to her acquaintances. Once past the butcher's shop and clear of Miss Murphy, Harry broke into a steady run. The track wound up a scrub-covered slope in an easy, gradual grade. Over the crest of the slope, the track descended again toward the old sawmill. The shack and sawmill were out of sight, hidden by scrub, and after a time Harry slowed to a jogging trot. He'll be asleep, he thought, so I won't want to wake him. One thing's certain, never again do I go off and leave him. Not while he's small. Like Ted said, he'll be on his own some day. That day's a long way off yet. Beginning to feel breathless, Harry eased his pace to a walk. In his mind, he knew he was suffering from remorse, and now he was nearly home, he began to reason with himself. "You're mad," he said, "and real dead scared. Scared when there ain't no cause to be. It's as safe as anywhere around that shack. Even old Cleaver's was crawling with snakes." Shocked by the sudden thought, Harry began running again, and reaching the top of the slope, paused to look down. At first he saw nothing in the darkness, only the dark and silent landscape under a moonless, starlit sky. Then he gasped, cold from the iciness that seemed to grip him. A thin spear of flame stabbed up from where he knew the shack to be. He saw its pencil point of light outline, for a moment, the shape of the roof. Then the tiny flame was gone, leaving an even deeper darkness. Shouting, "Kim! Kim!" Harry broke into a headlong run that carried him from the peak of the slope into dark brooding scrub. Following the track, he ran and sprawled flat on his face several times, yet scrambled up and ran on again. Sobbing for breath, he drove his straining legs until they flailed like broken pistons. Staggering into the open country around the shack, he reeled toward its now flaming walls. Unable to shout, he gulped for air as he whispered, "Kim, Kim, where are yer?" He reached the walls and tried to force his way through the red glowing heat of blazing wattle and baked peeling plaster, but his hands rebelled each time they neared the flames, and he staggered back, intending to fling himself forward headlong. His body was already braced when he heard Kim shout, "Hey Harry, I saw you runnin', but couldn't run myself because I had this water. I've been throwing bucket after bucket, but it don't seem to do much good." He came into focus in front of Harry's eyes, and swinging the big bucket he had in his hands, threw a stream of water over the fire. There was a hiss, and nothing more, only the brightness of the fierce red flames. For some moments Harry stared, disbelievingly, first at Kim and the bucket, then at the sinking walls and gutted roof, while his ribs labored, sucking in air. Kim stood near, watching and waiting. He wondered about the cut on Harry's face, but asked no questions. There was enough relief, for the moment, in knowing Harry was at hand to fight the fire. At last, Harry sucked in a final deep breath. Taking the bucket from Kim, he flung it far out into the darkness. They heard it crash, rattling amongst the scrub. "We don't want that," Harry said, "nor the shack. Come on and let's get Rony harnessed." He reached out stiffly, making sure that Kim was real when he touched him. Then the two walked toward the horse yard. They were at the slip rails before Kim asked, "Did you mean it, Harry, about the shack and bucket? You ain't mad with me about how the fire started?" He rubbed his singed ear, puzzled by how the candle had been knocked over. He remembered vividly waking and seeing the packing case in flames. Charlie the Possum had left as soon as its tail hit the bottle. Harry said, "No, I ain't mad. Not now or ever. The shack's gone, and we're going too. We're going home." He took the blinkers from a post and clambered in between the rails. Kim followed, carrying Roni's collar and Hames. They were being buckled around Roni's neck before Kim whispered, "Cor, did you mean that too, Harry? Mean what you just said?" He looked up and away to the smoke-hazed stars. They seemed to be pinned on a dark pad of velvet. He saw their glitter, bright and silvery white. If I was up there, he thought, I'd be looking down, seeing old Harry, and maybe Mum too. I bet she'd be smiling, knowing we were going home to her place. He pulled the harness from the rails and passed it to Harry. Harry slid it over the roan's back. Soon the gig was moving, being pulled away from the still burning shack. As the glowing walls faded behind a ridge of scrub, Harry said, "We'll be there in an hour or so. It ain't much of a road for driving on in the dark." He held the reins firmly in his one good hand. The other was scorched, and he let it hang limply. Kim wanted to speak but couldn't. There was a happiness in him that choked his throat. He was going home to Mum's place. That was all that mattered.